Well, welcome back to another episode of the Newt News Podcast. Unfortunately, there was no baseball today because of the rainy Florida weather. They always say it only rains like 20 minutes at a time, but apparently that's not today. But I'm joined again by Andrew and Sandy as usual, and our friend Katie Wu of The Athletic. Thank you so much, Katie, for joining us today. How has spring training been treating you so far?
Well, other than it being the complete opposite sleep schedule of my normal life, I have adjusted somewhat to those early mornings. It's been a lot of fun. It's great to be back and fully ready to go in terms of work, but it's also been nice to see what I believe is a completely different clubhouse in terms of morale. Now, of course, a clubhouse in February and early March is going to be different than a losing clubhouse in September. But I've been really encouraged overall by just the camaraderie within the group, how they look on the backfields, how they interact with each other. I mean, I can't remember the last time the Cardinals did something that wasn't like strictly fundamental baseball. And then all of a sudden they're out there on Friday doing this closest to the pin competition using Mo's clubs, by the way. John Mozeliak let them use his iron set, teeing the ball off home plate. And just kind of like boys being boys. So it's nice to see more smiles in that clubhouse than I saw over in the second half for sure.
Yeah, well, last time we talked to you was on that charity live stream a while back, and they were mostly through their offseason moves at that point. But before we jump into the spring training, we'd love to hear what were your overall thoughts on the offseason? Do you think they accomplished what they needed to? And what do you think the outlook is for this team entering the 2024 season?
Yeah, fair question. And I think this Cardinals offseason is why we stress you have to give an organization the whole winter, because I'm not going to lie, they did not start out strong in terms of offseason acquisitions. And I could definitely relate to the fan base's overall angst over the first couple of signings, getting not saying that Lanson and Kyle Gibson weren't impactful signings, but I'm sure the fan base was looking for a lot more. I think when you look in the overall amount of work that Mo, Gersh, Ollie had to do to turn this roster inside and out, I am pretty impressed by what the Cardinals did over the offseason. I mean, they got Sonny Gray, one of the top 5 free agent arms that they could have gotten on a relatively team-friendly deal. Their rotation does have that veteran experience. I think the bullpen, especially the way that the front office went about it, was incredibly smart. You really only had Ryan Helsley, Giovanni Gallegos, and Jojo Romero as like true returners, meaning they had 5 spots to fill. Bullpens are so finicky, so hard to predict, that going out and getting multitudes of guys and overstaffing your bullpen on very, very team-friendly deals, I thought was a smart play given how much the Cardinals had to turn over. And I'm looking at, again, to go back to the camaraderie, seeing what Matt Carpenter has done to loosen up that clubhouse and go out and mentor some of these guys. That's been really impactful as well. So I'm sure we'll get into all these individual signings and where it leads to the team now. But overall, I think the Cardinals did enough to get the fan base excited. It helps that the NL Central is probably not going to be very good. And I definitely think that this is a team that can get 85 wins as a floor.
Okay.
And will that be enough for the NL Central? Maybe, but we'll go ahead and see.
So the vibes in the fan base should be pretty good heading into the season. And speaking of that, we'd love to hear what the vibes are in camp right now. What's the feeling around the team as we're a couple weeks in now?
Well, it's a little difficult to get the overall sense of how this club is feeling because there's just so many guys. The Cardinals haven't done their first cuts yet. So you walk in that clubhouse, which is very small, and there's about 70 guys in there. So it's hard to get a full read on what the clubhouse looks like. I get a better idea going out in the backfields, watching live BPs, watching bullpens. I've been really impressed with Wilson Contreras taking into that leadership role. I call him the dad of the catchers because no matter where you go, he's mentored. And it's a young, exciting group of catchers at Cardinals camp this year. Herrera's all around, Pedro Pajas as well. I mean, Contreras is always looking forward or looking out for those guys, and they kind of stick together as their own little group. Lars Nootbaar has been keeping things entertaining. No surprise there. I even saw him get Goldie to crack a smile a couple of times. So that's pretty much a sign that you're doing things right. Carp, I think, has been great. Haven't seen too much of Crawford, obviously, because he's only been here a few days. But I think it's definitely going to be helpful for Mason Wynn to have someone with that kind of rapport around. Overall, when you're looking at the little groups, and I didn't even get to the bullpen, again, I think the bullpen is going to be really good. I've been encouraged by what I've seen from Ryan Helsley in a leadership role as well. He's going around and he's kind of like, all right, guys, here's what we're going to do here. Here's what you can look for on this end. A lot of new faces, a lot of change, but I think overall the general consensus is pretty positive.
That's awesome. Before we get into some of these more specific storylines, we'd love for you to participate in a brand new part of our show, the Benches Clearing segment, powered by Tracy's Karate.
Okay.
For our listeners, during this segment, we're going to ask our guests, fun or hypothetical self-defense questions and see what they think. If you're watching live or listening later, we'd love for you to jump in the chat and answer the question for yourself. Katie, this week's Benches Clearing question is this. Starting with one third grader and adding one each time, how many waves of third graders could you fight off?
Oh, no.
We asked the hard-hitting questions here.
That's true.
Look, I'm pretty confident. I'm confident in my ability to like take down up to 3 third graders. Here's the problem is that third graders are like super cute. So I would feel so bad that I'd probably just like let them win. But if we're fighting for like life or death.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the stipulation here.
I don't know. I'm not a very strong person. I think I have the upper body strength of like a wet noodle. I don't know, 10? Is that a lot?
10,
that's pretty good. That's pretty impressive.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think the third graders they'd probably win, but I give it my best effort.
I like it. 10 because you're fighting off different waves before that too. That means you got through 9 at one point. So
that's true.
That's I didn't think about the waves. Okay, yeah, we have to cut that. Maybe 7.
That's still pretty good. I feel like for me, I'm getting around that. It's scary though. I can't imagine 7 angry third graders coming at me.
No, I'd probably just run away. I just hope I could outrun them, and then maybe they get tired. That way, I don't have to resort to physical violence. Smart, right?
Well, we hope you never have to fight off waves of third graders. But we did just want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Tracy's Karate. Tracy's Karate has been serving the local St. Louis community since 1969, specializing in private lessons for practical and effective self-defense instruction. Private lessons allow Tracy's to teach anybody, focusing on your personal goals and your own learning style. Try out a free half-hour private lesson today. Call 314-821-0555 or visit tracys.com for more details. It's a fantastic opportunity to learn valuable self-defense skills, and if you decide to sign up, let them know the crew at Newt News sent you. Again, that phone number is 314-821-0555, and the website is tracys.com.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks. Oh, gosh, Andrew.
All right, so moving on from that, what's the top storyline that you're currently watching for as camp is going on?
It's still Tommy Edman for me, just because he's such an instrumental plug for this roster. And, we look at the calendar, we can all count down the days, 25 days until opening day. And Edman is still progressing I don't want to say slowly, but the ramp we're running out of runway here. And I'm not going to be the one to say he's not going to be ready for opening day. And I'm not going to say that until the team says that. But I think there's been some internal concern on if he's going to be ready or not. And that does make sense given where we are in the calendar and the fact that the Cardinals would prefer that he gets some live ABs. He hasn't been cleared to do that. I do feel better now that the Cardinals have Brandon Crawford behind Mason Wynn. And I also feel better seeing what Mason has done in his limited spring action so far. This is a dude that I think can be a major game changer. He's just playing with so much confidence. Last spring, he was confident, right? But he also kind of knew this wasn't necessarily his spring where he was going to go make that opening day roster. It was, hey, let me show this organization how far along I am in my development program, and let me put myself on the radar. The Cardinals came into spring training saying Mason Wynn is going to be our rookie opening day shortstop. And now I think he kind of embraced that and he's running with it. And now he has someone like Crawford, who's won 2 World Series, has a very decorated career in San Francisco, knows how to win, knows how to play the position behind him to help. So I'm very concerned about Edman, just because I think the time-wise, it might be really tough for him to make that opening day roster. And I do think he's their best center fielder. But knowing that Mason's having such a strong spring, knowing that Crawford's right behind him, now it's just up to Dylan Carlson. Can he hit the ball consistently? We know that he's a very athletic defensive center fielder. But if they're going to rely on Carlson every day until Edman is ready, then this is a really important spring for Dylan there.
Yeah, we'll go back to the Crawford stuff in a second, but let's linger with Dylan Carlson for a second. Obviously, this is kind of like a crossroads season for him. It really feels like it'll be maybe not career defining, but maybe St. Louis Cardinal career defining for him. If he gets this runway to start the year, that'd be huge for his career. But I mean, I know it's just spring training, but it hasn't looked great so far. A lot of people want to see Victor Scott. There's a lot of conversation around center field. If Edman's not ready to go opening day, are you confident that Dylan Carlson will be the guy for him? Or is there an opening here where maybe things could get shaken up, whether it's Victor Scott in center, New Bar moving to center, or something like that?
I'm pretty confident it'll be Dylan. The Cardinals, love Lars Nootbaar. They also love him in left field. They're not going to make any change to center. Lars' best fit in left field. This is not to say that he could not play center field in a pinch. We've seen him do it before, but metric-wise and overall feel-wise, they like him in left. So I don't really envision an opening day with Lars Nootbaar in center field. I do think it's Carlson's position. I think Victor Scott's spring is very similar to Mason Wynn's spring last year, where he's close. Don't get me wrong, guys. It's a very impressive young guy to watch and nearly everything that he does. But it would take a major catastrophe for the Cardinals to call him up, just because they don't want to rush that development, because he will be such an instrumental part of their club going forward. There's a reason Michael Ciani has lived on the 40-man roster for so long. They need a backup center fielder, and he's really the only one that can do it behind Carlson. So yes, I would agree, Josh, that this is a St. Louis defining point for Dylan this year. It'll be nice if he gets this runway. I know he's going to get plenty of opportunity this spring. That's something Ollie Marmol talked about, was getting Carlson out there as much as they can. It's all about consistent hitting from the right and left side, getting a hard hit percentage, hitting the ball much harder, getting the ball off the ground, things that we talk about with the Cardinals all the time. And if Dylan can do that, keep in mind he's only 24 years old. And I feel like because he debuted at such an early age, he feels a lot older than he actually is. But, this could be maybe the spark that Dylan needs. He certainly came to camp pretty motivated, so we will see. But my bets are, if Tommy Edman is not ready for opening day, you'll see Carlson in center field.
Yeah.
Yeah, so recently we mentioned the Cardinals signed Brandon Crawford to a 1-year deal to back up Mason Wynn at shortstop. What do you see his role being with the club this season? And was the move really necessary? Because we have some other depth options as well.
Yeah, so let's break down the Crawford signing, and we'll tie in a little bit of Matt Carpenter, because I think when you look at those guys and you see their overall makeup on paper, you're thinking these are pretty similar signings, but the signings were done for completely different reasons. Yes, you have two lefty veterans that are basically reserve infielders. I know Crawford's only played shortstop, but he did say that he would be willing to switch positions. Cardinals are not interested in that. Appreciate the offer, but no thanks. So I get the question as to why both of them. But let's go back to why these guys were signed, because again, it's completely different. The Cardinals knew coming into the 2024 season, they needed a veteran presence, 26-man, that mentorship role that can go ahead and play different positions across the infield. They identified Matt Carpenter for reasons we've discussed before. He has plenty of experience in this organization. He knows how to bring Cardinals baseball back to and kind of implement that and refine the identity of this organization, because let's face it, that did get lost last year. And most importantly, he was willing to take a reduced role. A lot of guys out there aren't willing to get, 5 or 6 at-bats a week and be okay with it. But Carp was 100% fine with being the 26th man on the roster. So Cardinals went out, got him. They knew what they were getting to Matt Carpenter. No surprises. And I've seen it firsthand. It's been instrumentally important in that clubhouse, and it's made a difference so far. Crawford, the Cardinals came to spring training not thinking they were going to need a reserve infielder, a reserve shortstop, I should say, because that's very important here. Matt Carpenter cannot play shortstop. He can play pretty much anywhere else in the infield, but not shortstop. They got there, and they took a look at Mason Wynn, and they said, maybe we didn't consider this as much as we should have over the offseason. They were really focused on pitching, as we know. And they basically thought supplementing Mason with a reserve infielder would alleviate some of the pressure. So you don't have a 21-year-old rookie out there on opening day in a season where the Cardinals pretty much have to win, feeling all this pressure. And the more they thought about it, because they thought they had that in Tommy Edman, the more they thought that wasn't fair to Tommy either, because they're asking Tommy to go out there and play center field every day in a position that he proved he could do, but it's still relatively new to him. So they got there, they looked at the roster. They also took a look at Tommy Edman's health line and were like, maybe we need a reserve shortstop. So they went out and they were looking at options. And all of a sudden, over the last 6 days, the reserve infield market hit a crazy wave. And guys were signing left and right. You think about Tim Anderson, Rosario went, I can't remember where, you'll have to remind me. Again, this happened so fast.
Tampa, I think, right? For Rosario.
That sounds right. I don't know. Nick Ahmed to San Francisco. And it just made sense that the Cardinals bounced on Crawford, someone that Mo has liked dating all the way back to the 2012 NLCS, to go get him. And so that the rush in the market kind of expedited the Cardinals' decision, but they pretty much decided within the first week of camp that they needed to get a reserve shortstop. So two completely different areas in that signing.
Even so, though, do you think the signing of Crawford in some ways makes Carpenter redundant? Because Crawford can do the things that Carpenter does, where he could be the 26th guy on the roster. I don't know if he's willing to take that role, but he could do that. And he does provide the depth that Carpenter doesn't. I mean, I would assume that Crawford is capable of playing first base. And if you said he's willing to switch positions, could that mean that we see Matt Carpenter off this roster at some point? Or on the flip side, does a healthy Tommy Edman and maybe Victor Scott coming into his own, does that portend to a Crawford DFA?
Yeah, Matt Carpenter's not coming off this roster. Okay. There's just no way. The Cardinals wouldn't bring him back and open themselves up to both criticism and praise from fans, because he is a fan favorite, whether or not you agree with him on the roster.
Yeah.
Just to DFA him because they're going to go sign Brandon Crawford. Matt Carpenter's going to be there on opening day and likely through the rest of the season. It's just kind of why they brought him in and the role that he will serve in. Now, if Tommy Edman is cleared or a fast recovery, I don't know if that's necessarily a DFA for Brandon Crawford for reasons we just talked about, because they would still be in the same position of putting a lot of pressure on Edman to be the backup shortstop and mentor Mason Wynn while also being the starting center fielder. What I do think it does is block Alec Burleson. So when the Cardinals signed Matt Carpenter, the main feedback I got was, what does this mean for Burleson? And I said, it actually doesn't mean anything for him at all, because there's 26 men allowed on the roster now. So they can take an extra lefty bat. There's actually not a lot of concern over not having a lot of right-handers because of the 3-batter minimum. So if you have a bench that's full of lefties plus Ivan Herrera, Cardinals aren't really too concerned about that, because there's no longer the matchups there with a 3-batter minimum doesn't really influence roster changes as much as it did in the past. But Burleson now with Crawford and Carp, now I think he's blocked. So that's where I think, Mo was asked about this a couple of days ago and called it almost nonsensical, I think, to ask about Burleson's status on the roster this early. Very Mo comment.
Oh, man.
But it is relatively true, because there's still 4 weeks to go. Lots can happen with Tommy. Lots can happen with any guys on the roster. But I don't see Crawford being DFA'd this early, regardless of the start. Same with Carp. If anything, this Crawford signing blocks Alec Burleson.
Dang, tough news for Burley. How does it affect Victor Scott too? I think is something we're wondering. Because if they're, less reliant on Tommy Edman at short later on, does that mean they can have Tommy Edman in the outfield more, which could mean Victor Scott is less likely to get opportunities? How do you see that playing out?
I think it's pretty similar to Mason's trajectory. Again, these springs are very similar for a reason, and so much can happen over the first 3 months of the season. No one knows if this is the roster the Cardinals are going to have come the trade deadline. So all Victor Scott really has to worry about at this point is continue making the really great impressions that he has, playing every day, and then go tearing it up at AAA. We'll see him sooner than I think a lot of people think. He's such a dynamic player. He really fits into what I think old school Cardinal baseball does. Watching Wynn, Victor kind of play their speed games on the bases, that's kind of the Cardinal baseball that we thought of in the 1980s, right? And I would be eager to see the Cardinals get back to that identity. I just don't think it'll be in April this year.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And even without the signings, it kind of felt pretty aggressive for Scott to be up this early, but maybe it does temper how quickly he could be up, especially if Edman's healthy, Dylan's playing. But we've talked a lot about the position player group and not a lot about the pitching yet, which is kind of the opposite of how the whole offseason was. One of the things I thought is kind of interesting is how slow they've been with Steven Matz and Lance Lynn so far. Neither has appeared in the game yet. Seems like Matz, they're being even a little bit more intentional about being slow to start the year. Are you concerned at all about the status of this 5-man group entering opening day? Or does it just kind of feel like this is just the path they're taking, but by the time they're ready to go open up in LA, all 5 guys will be ready to go?
Josh, you're a mind reader. It's like you knew exactly what I had teed up for the Athletic tomorrow morning.
There you go.
I'm not concerned, because this is pretty standard procedure, not just for the Cardinals, but for a lot of organizations and how they bring in their pitchers. Keep in mind, the Cardinals did something similar to this last year with Jack Flaherty and Jordan Montgomery. But the reasons that Steven Matz and Lance Lynn haven't appeared in games yet are different. Steven, it's intentional. They're hoping a less aggressive spring can lead to longer sustained health throughout the season. Lance Lynn just prefers to do it this way, similar to what Jordan Montgomery did last year. Montgomery preferred to do it the way that he is right now. So I'll have to double check, because I'm sure with the rainout, some things change. I did see a tweet from Derek Gould, which is as good as the words. If Derek's putting it out there, it's pretty accurate. Steven Matz was supposed to piggyback off Miles Michaelis on Tuesday. I believe he's now doing it. He's coming after Sonny Gray on Monday. and Lance Lynn will remain on track to start on Friday. But the reasons that they're not in games are completely different. We know about Matz's injury history over his time with St. Louis. We've seen how effective he's been when healthy and how ineffective he's been when not healthy. And when you think about how Steven Matz ended the year last year and how strong he looked as a starter in his second stint there, you can see why the Cardinals are interested in trying this experiment where he's slower to ramp up, right? Where Lance Lynn, he's been there, done this so many times. He's like, yeah, I know what I need out of myself. I'll go out there and I'll pitch when I'm ready. He stayed on a schedule on the backfield just because you didn't see him in games. Doesn't mean they're not getting work in. But overall, not concerned at all in terms of workload. Do I think the rotation is still the weakest link of this roster? Yes.
Yeah. No question on that one.
Yeah, so well, I asked you a very unhinged question last year when we had you on during spring training, but tragically that didn't come to fruition. But regardless of how many two-way players the Cardinals have on their roster, they're considering using a 6-man rotation. So Zack Thompson and Matthew Liberatore are kind of the two guys that I'm seeing as candidates for that. But how likely is it that the Cardinals will open the season with a 6-man rotation, and who do you think would fill that spot?
I think your two candidates are exactly who you just said, and Libby and Zack Thompson. I thought Zack looked pretty good in his last start Saturday. I already don't know my days. And Libby, it's all about landing that secondary stuff, especially the slider curveball. If the Cardinals do decide to do a 6-man rotation, it'll strictly be for, I would say, a 2-week period. I don't think you're getting guys like Sonny Gray, Miles Michaelis, Lance Lynn agreeing to a 6-man rotation all year long. But it does make sense when you look at how the Cardinals open the season. They're on the West Coast. 3 out of their first 4 road trips. They have, I think, 1 day off in their first 14 days. It wouldn't hurt to get a 6-man rotation as like a one-time through just to keep guys fresh. Do I expect it being a month-long thing or extra or longer? No, not at all. But definitely something they're considering. And when you look at the schedule, it does make sense. But I think similar to Dylan Carlson, this is a prove-it year for Libby and Thompson. What can they be? Can they be middle of the rotation starters? Are they going to be effective in relief? We saw how good Libby was in relief last year. Can he build off of that? Can they find consistency? Those are the big questions I'm looking for Libby and Zack. And whether or not they get used in a swingman role, 6-man rotation, they go to AAA for starting depth. I think overall their performances over the next 3 weeks will dictate that.
I love that you're talking about Zack Thompson. He's somebody that hasn't gotten enough attention from Cardinals fans, and he was really good when he got to start last year. Do you think there's a chance that he's a better starter right now than one of Kyle Gibson or Lance Lynn?
That's a tough question for me because I've seen Kyle Gibson throw 2 innings and I haven't seen Lance Lynn throw at all. I understand why the Cardinals have loaded their rotation the way that they have. I mean, when you think about how the 2023 season ended, I know that's probably not something a lot of us want to think about.
Yeah.
And you look at where people are, like the manager in the contracts, and you look at where players are, Paul Goldschmidt in contracts. There's a lot of pressure for the Cardinals to win fast and win early. And putting all of your faith into a bunch of young guys who haven't had to deal with that kind of pressure yet isn't necessarily the best recipe for success. Now, Kyle Gibson can go out there, and whether or not you need him to win or lose, he's going to have the exact same mentality, right? He's going to go out there and he knows what it takes to win. He's not going to snowball. Same with Lance Lynn. He's not going to snowball. They're going to give you quality innings. Now, you can argue if what Mo has done has been enough to make them a successful team all year long, and I'll totally hear that argument. But for Zack, if you're preaching consistency for him and you're also demanding winning early in the season to avoid a snowball effect like last year, that's a lot of mental pressure to put on someone in both a personal and team-wise. So do I think he has the potential to be an effective starter? I absolutely do. I think Zack Thompson is very close to figuring it out, but I understand why the Cardinals went with veterans first.
Totally understandable. I think there's a better way for me to phrase this. Maybe what happens if 2.5 months into the season, we see that Zack Thompson is the more effective pitcher than one of those guys? Is there a world in which the Cardinals would fully commit to him being one of the 5 starting pitchers? And what does that look like for whoever is getting relegated? Are they a bullpen arm? How does that work for the Cardinals? Can they move off of these contracts?
I think we saw that last year, right? When Steven Matz struggled, they booted him to the bullpen and they gave many guys opportunities to run with it. And none of those guys ran with the opportunity. And Steven did in the bullpen and earned it back. One thing about Ollie Marmol, whether or not you agree with him as a manager, with the exception being Adam Wainwright, because there was simply nobody else in AAA that they could try. He's not afraid to splash things up, and performance does dictate your playing time. So yeah, if one of the 5 struggles and Zack Thompson is out there shoving, they could definitely make that change.
Yeah, well, speaking of performance and competitions, you mentioned earlier the bullpen is such a fun mix to watch right now. They've added a ton of arms, and honestly, it's probably the group that could propel the club in a great way, or maybe not be the detriment, but be the difference between it hitting its ceiling or not. What are some names out of the bullpen group that you've been keeping your eye on or have been impressing you so far in camp?
It's funny because how the Cardinals built their bullpen, I thought was very indicative of how fans' excitement throughout the offseason went. Their first couple moves, I was like, this doesn't really do a lot for them. Started to pique my interest at Andrew Kittredge. And then by the time they had signed Keenan Middleton, I was like, oh, this is going to be a good bullpen. Yeah. So again, this is why you give an organization the whole offseason before you really judge them. I think Middleton will be a game changer. I think he has such a fun, swaggy demeanor. He's different. And that's a good thing. You need kind of someone to shake it up like that. I've really enjoyed my interactions with him. Riley O'Brien is who I pegged as an under-the-radar candidate to watch. Well, he's no longer under the radar because everyone seems to love him, and for good reason. He's got nasty stuff. And I'm also big on a comeback year from Giovanni Gallegos, because when you look at his usage dating back to 2018, there's nobody in the National League that has appeared in more relief games than Gio. And that is one thing that the organization loves about him, is this dude takes the ball every single day. And you have a lot of guys in that clubhouse in years prior that wouldn't necessarily do that. I think the pitch clock adjustment and pitching the World Baseball Classic, and I'm a World Baseball Classic girl, so no shade there, maybe exhausted him a little bit more than he or the organization thought. But that makes sense when you see his usage. You're like, this is a guy that just never gets tired. Also, when you look at his overall career, the 2023 was by far the worst year of his career, and he's been in the big leagues for 7 years, so he's allowed to have a down year in terms of how careers go as a reliever. So those are the 3 that I think could be difference makers. And then I'll throw in Jojo Romero as well. We're familiar with him, but he was so close to finding something in 2023 before he hit that left knee injury. And there was a reason the Cardinals were penning him in the back end of their bullpen at the end of 2023. He's got some nasty stuff as well.
Yeah, it's a really fun group, because we even mentioned Ryan Fernandez, Nick Robertson. There's just a lot of different arms in there. And then on the flip side, there are still some young starters outside of Thompson and Liberatore, the Gordon Graceffos of the world, Michael McGreevy's. In a similar way where we talked about Crawford and Carpenter potentially blocking opportunities, or at least in the immediate future blocking opportunities for Alec Burleson, some of these type of names. Is that probably the same situation for Gordon Graceffo, Michael McGreevy, other names like that, where it's pretty unlikely we'll see them barring injuries most of this season? Or is there a world where they could carve out a bullpen role or kind of move up into the next man up in the rotation above a Zack Thompson or a Matthew Liberatore?
I don't see that yet from either of those two, just because they need more consistency. It's not for me being out on either of them, but when you look at their overall depth chart, why rush them to the big leagues unless it's an emergency? I do think of those 2 names, Graceffo could maybe convert to a relief role and be really effective there. The biggest question for Graceffo's development is sustainability. He's really good for 1, 2, 3 innings, but then the velo drops, the results drop. So trends point at him being a successful reliever, but the Cardinals overall need to do a better job of developing pitchers. That's a conversation for another day. I don't think these signings are blocking Graceffo or McGreevy by any means. I think this is a big year for them development-wise in AAA. And when their opportunity comes, I'm sure they'll be ready, but they need both of them. I think the organization would be happier to see more consistency in terms of game results before they come to that decision.
Yeah, so another follow-up with the rotation. We're seeing some of the top free agents like Jordan Montgomery and Blake Snell have to go on short-term deals or looking for shorter-term deals like Cody Bellinger and Matt Chapman got. Was it a mistake by the Cardinals to jump the market with Gibson and Lynn like they did, and avoiding a potential Snell or Montgomery signing? And do you think that there's any case where the Cardinals would be able to jump on one of those guys on a shorter-term deal for the rest of the season?
This is an interesting question. And it's a really good one. No, I don't think it was a mistake, because if the Cardinals waited on Gibson or Lynn, they don't get Sonny Gray. Okay. So if you don't get Sonny Gray, what's the point in getting anyone else? And then if you get, let's say they get one or the other. Let's say they get Kyle Gibson and Sonny Gray. Who is your fifth starter where you feel super, super confident that they can go in? And maybe you don't feel that way about Gibson or Lynn right now, and that's totally fair. But it leaves a gaping hole for a player that, we're not 29 other teams, but at least 5 or 6 others are going to be looking at that same reduced deal. The Cardinals were never interested in Blake Snell. He didn't fit what they wanted. They didn't love his walk rate from day one. They were like, that's not going to be a fit for us. Free agency is also a two-way street. And, Jordan Montgomery also has to come to want to come back to St. Louis. And I think he was really happy in Texas. I certainly can't speak for him. But if Boris is now suddenly offering these reduced deals with, we'll call them basically glamorized pillow deals, the Cardinals aren't the only team that's going to be intrigued by that. And Mo doesn't like to speak in definitives, but he's been pretty confident and pretty honest that they were done in the starting pitching market. So I don't think it's a mistake, because if you wait too long, you run the risk of what Mo almost did with Sonny Gray and miss out. And then all of a sudden you have the exact same problem we did in October, but it's March and you can't fix that. So I think this fan base wanted action early. Whether or not you like the action is totally fair and totally justified. But if you were John Mozeliak and you waited, the Cardinals jump-started the market this year. They never do that. If you are looking to return to the playoffs and set the tone for the offseason, and you're proactive rather than reactive, I think that sends a good message to the fan base. Because imagine what the reaction would be if we were sitting here in the middle of February and they'd only signed Sonny Gray.
Yeah, that I was mentioning that earlier because I've seen people saying oh, they should have gotten Snell on a short-term deal. But if they had entered spring training with Gray, Michaelis, Matz, Thompson, Liberatore's the rotation, we think Cardinal fans are mad right now. It would be Cardinal apocalypse right now. It'd be terrible.
I agree. And that's what makes this such an interesting offseason, because there's so many. Well, what if they did this? What if they did this? And everything is it's like a vortex, right? You can get lost in what they should have done, what they didn't do, what they could have done now that we know about Boris in the market. But the fact of the matter is Sonny Gray was their guy all along. It was never any of the other top starters, as we know. So the fact that they got him in the way that they did, I think was probably the only way that this rotation shakes out with at least a semi-positive vibe from the fan base this year.
Yeah, for all the uncertainty around the pitching staff, we've kind of assumed all offseason that the lineup is super certain. We feel really good about it going into the season. And I know that it's just March 3rd today. But to this point, the Cardinals have 0 home runs in spring training. And for me, it's just annoying. I just want to watch some fun highlights. But should fans be concerned at all about the power outage early in spring training, or does it really not matter?
Yeah. Do you guys know how many fun tweets I've had to not send because they can't hit the ball over the fence?
Exactly. I'm sick of it.
So no, I'm not concerned, but it is at this point, it's kind of funny. When are they going to do it?
I know.
It's spring training. Guys are just trying to get their at bats. That's why you have Newbar batting third. He's not going to bat third in a real regular season game, but if he's scheduled for 3 at bats, he's going to get higher up in the lineup. That's why you see Matt Carpenter 5th. When are you going to see Carp 5th in a game? Probably not often. So I'm not super concerned, but I do think it's kind of a funny bit now. What if they go all spring without hitting a homer? And even Ollie was the coaching staff was taking bets on what game we would ask about it. And I think it was Friday that we asked about it. It was Jeff Jones, and Ollie was be right back. And he gets Daniel Descalso in there, and he said, when did we say the media was going to ask about home runs? And Descalso was like, Friday. And he goes, and who did I say was going to ask? And Descalso looks around the room and points right at Jeff. And Ollie goes, thank you. That's all I need. So no, not super concerned, but it is kind of funny. Talk to me in a week if they haven't, and then I'll be like, something's up.
Yeah. And people are asking for Whitey ball all off season. So I think they got it. There's just no more home runs. It's just speed. It's just contact. That's all we're doing. Well, Katie, thanks for your time today. On the way out, we just want to ask you maybe what's a bold prediction you have at this point in spring training? You've seen the team a little bit. Obviously, it's really early, but it can go any direction, whether it's team performance, individual player performance. But what's one bold prediction you have for the Cardinals this year?
Oh, for the Cardinals, let me think, because I have a couple of hot takes. Which one do I really?
You can go that direction too.
I love hot takes.
I think Nolan Arenado will be an MVP candidate this year.
Okay, bounce back, Nolan.
Take. Yeah, I think he's seen the ball really well. He seems different, motivated, a little bit lighter. Those veterans really helped him de-stress a little bit. And if I give you, I'm trying to think of one from the pitching side. I don't know. Not a good sign if I don't have any hot takes about the pitching.
That's okay. Honestly, maybe in some ways it's best that it's steady.
Yeah,
like
you know, if the
last year,
rotation's steady, that's all you could ask for, right?
yeah. Which honestly, in a lot of people's opinion, would be bold. So we'll go
There
with
we
that. If
go.
we can get a steady rotation, a rejuvenated Olnarano, it should be a pretty good 2024 season. Well, Katie, thanks again for hopping on. We really appreciate you joining us. Again, if you've been watching, thanks for joining us on Sunday, or if you're watching later, just hit the subscribe button. It helps out the podcast a ton. We've got more player profiles and other fun content coming out the rest of this week and the rest of spring training. And we look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thanks, Tracy.